I never thought I'd see the day when the steel plant in Gary, Indiana, went dark. I started there when I was 19, right after high school. My father had been a millwright there for 3 decades, and his father before him had swung a hammer in the same shadows. It was more than a job. It was the backbone of our family, the rhythm of our town. Everyone I knew either worked at the plant, married someone who did, or relied on its paychecks flowing into local stores and schools. By the time I turned 39, I had 20 years in. My body carried the proof. Burns from molten slag, a long scar down my left wrist from a grinder accident, and knees that cracked whenever I climbed the stairs. But I was proud. The plant gave me enough to buy a small house for my wife, Rachel, and our son, Caleb. It gave us vacations we couldn't have dreamed of otherwise. Weekends fishing in Michigan, Christmas mornings where Caleb tore open gifts I'd never seen under my own childhood tree. That morning in February started like all the rest. Snow clung to the edges of the lot, and my thermos steamed in my hand. I punched the clock, nodded to the same men I'd known since boyhood, and thought about Caleb's baseball season and whether Rachel would finally stop nagging me to fix the leaky faucet. Nothing suggested the ground was about to fall out from under us. Then the loudspeaker crackled. All hands to the main floor. We shuffled in under the harsh fluorescence. The air smelled of grease and steel dust. Mr. Kane, the plant manager, stood on a crate. He was usually stern, never sentimental, but that morning he looked hollow. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and said the words that split my life into before and after. The company has decided to cease operations effective next month. Steel demand is down. Overseas competition. You all know the story. For a second, silence. Then shouting. What about our pensions? What happens to our health insurance? What the hell are we supposed to do? Kane's answers, transition programs, assistance, retraining, were cardboard over a sinkhole. I stood frozen. My father's voice rang in my head. The plant will take your body, but it will feed your family. Now it was taking both. The crowd broke into knots. Men cursed, men cried, men stared blankly. These were tough men. Guys who could haul beams in July heat, guys who'd buried friends after accidents, and now they looked like abandoned children. I drove home in silence, the radio off. Rachel met me at the door, flour on her hands from baking bread. Caleb sprawled on the couch, headset on, laughing into his Xbox. Rachel saw my face and froze. What happened? She whispered. They're closing it, I said. The words felt like swallowing nails. Her hand went to her mouth. What do we do? I didn't have an answer. The plant closed exactly 30 days later. The machines were silent, the gates chained, weeds already creeping into cracks. Driving past felt like visiting a cemetery where someone you loved had just been buried. Severance was laughable. Unemployment barely covered groceries. Rachel picked up extra shifts at the diner, coming home with aching feet and a fake smile. I sat at the kitchen table scrolling job sites filled with postings that wanted degrees I didn't have, skills I'd never learned, or 10 years experience in fields I'd never heard of. Caleb asked if we could still afford his baseball league. I told him yes, but inside I knew the truth was no. To keep my promise, I pawned my father's old toolbox. Watching the clerk carry it away felt like betraying him twice, once by losing the plant, and again by selling the only piece of him I had left. Interviews were humiliating. I sat across from managers young enough to be my interns, answering questions about Excel spreadsheets and digital inventory systems. I lied, said I could learn. They never called back. Bills piled like bricks. Collection letters shouted in red. Rachel asked me one night if we were going to lose the house. I snapped, "Do you think I'm not trying?" The look on her face gutted me. She cried quietly at the table, and I hated myself more than I hated the company that closed the gates. Whiskey became my refuge. Cheap bottles hidden in the garage, sipped from coffee mugs so Rachel wouldn't notice. But she always noticed. She knew the smell, the slump of my shoulders, the way my words slurred by the second glass. One night she sat across from me, her face pale, eyes steady. "I need you to fight for us, Mike, not drown us." Her words cut deeper than the layoff. The next week, I signed up for a welding class at the community college. Sitting in a classroom at 40 felt like punishment. The instructor was younger than me, the students barely out of high school, earbuds in, chugging energy drinks. I felt ancient, but I showed up. Every day. The work was tough, but my body remembered. Sparks flying, heat on my face, the smell of metal. It was familiar. My hands steadied even when my mind whispered, "You're too old for this." Rachel cheered me on. She taped my test scores to the fridge beside Caleb's report cards. Caleb pretended not to care, but one night he said quietly, "You're actually doing it." That meant more than he knew. The course led to an apprenticeship at a fabrication shop. The pay wasn't what the plant had offered, but it kept the lights on and food in the fridge. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't failing completely. Therapy became part of the package through the retraining program. At first I resented it, but the counselor said something that stuck. "Your worth isn't your wage." I didn't believe it immediately. Some days I still don't, but it planted a seed. At home, laughter returned in small doses. Caleb made varsity baseball. I sat in the stands yelling like a fool, clapping until my hands stung. When he hit a double and pointed at me, I felt something crack open. Hope. Maybe. I still dreamed of the plant, of machines humming, of coworkers laughing. Waking up hurt, but every day I welded something new, and piece by piece, I began to rebuild myself too. 3 years later, the plant is rubble. Developers talk about condos, maybe a shopping center. To outsiders, it's just another empty lot. To me, it's a graveyard of ghosts. My father's sweat, my grandfather's pride, my own youth. Sometimes bitterness floods me when I see headlines about CEOs pocketing bonuses while towns like mine collapse. But then Caleb tosses me a ball in the yard. Rachel calls me in for dinner, and I remind myself, survival is rebellion. I work steady hours at the shop now. The pay isn't as high, but it's honest. Caleb talks about college. I don't know how we'll pay for it, but I'll try. Rachel and I are closer now, scarred but still side by side. On a shelf in my garage sits my father's dented hard hat. I didn't pawn that. Couldn't. It reminds me not just of what I lost, but of what I carry forward. Endurance, grit, stubbornness. When people ask what it was like when the plant shut down, I tell them, it broke me, then forced me to rebuild. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But here I am, scarred, sober, working, still a father, still a husband. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.